Hi, I'm Paul Mullins. I was one of the first two Bantz fellows with my colleague Susan Hyatt in the Department of Anthropology, and we shared the project Invisible Indianapolis, Race, Heritage, and Community Memory in the Circle City in 2016-2017. And we were interested in heritage in our midst that's rarely, if ever, acknowledged, and everyday life of people like these two brothers, Carter and Ralph Temple. This photograph was taken near their house at Minerva and North Street in about 1929. This is Ralph about 10 years later, in 1939, when he was then a student at Herring. This is one of Ralph's paintings of his home at the corner of Minerva and North Street with the school in the background. His family built that house in about 1866. His grandfather and great-grandfather had both been enslaved, and at the end of the Civil War, they came to Indianapolis and built those structures, including the kind of red double there as well. This is what the house looked like in 1975 in the upper left. And in the lower left, that's a little map of the neighborhood in 1915, which was a densely settled, and at that point, predominantly African-American neighborhood. The neighborhood where the Temple home stood was transformed during the 1960s by the expansion of Indiana University and what would become the campus of IUPUI. In 1966, the university first approached the Temple family, who had by that point been living there for 4 generations. They offered to purchase the house for $23,000. That fourth generation descendant, Lucy Temple, would refuse to sell until 1978. She wanted $98,000 for the property. These are the little stories that we were particularly interested in, and we're particularly interested in histories and contemporary effects. We did these as sort of small case studies, and if you'd like to look at any of them, they are on the Invisible Indianapolis webpage. Some of them are on my webpage as well. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Susan Hyatt, and with my colleague Paul Mullins, we worked on a project we called Invisible Indianapolis. Today I'm going to share a little bit of my research with you about the Sephardic Jewish community. Now, this is a census sheet from 1920 from Indianapolis, and for the people on the rows that I've highlighted, you can see that it lists their birthplace as Turkey and yet their tongue as Spanish. How can this be that in 1920 we had people living in the Circle City who were born in Turkey and yet had Spanish as their native language? Well, I'm going to unravel some of that mystery for you right now. Our story begins in 1492 on the Iberian Peninsula when the king and queen issued what became known as the Edict of Expulsion. This mandated that Jews had to either accept Catholicism and convert or flee. Many of the Jews chose to flee and they settled all over the world, but they found a particularly welcome harbor in the Ottoman Empire where the Sultan welcomed them. So in the census where it says Turkey, the birthplace of those immigrants was actually the Ottoman Empire, and the language Spanish refers to Ladino, which was the vernacular language that the Spanish-speaking immigrants brought with them as they fled. Our original Sephardic settlers in Indianapolis hailed from 2 cities in the Ottoman Empire, Monastir and Salonika. Today those cities are Bitola, which is in North Macedonia, and Thessaloniki, which is in Greece. Now, how the first Monastirlis, or people from Monastir, came to the city is not entirely known. This article names the Toledano family as the first Sephardic settlers in 1906. This is somewhat debated in the Sephardic community here, but in any case, it's significant to note that they opened a men's tailoring shop on West Washington Street. Now, we think that many of the people who came from the Ottoman Empire and who came from Monastir and Salonika were actually coming through the intermediary actions of an agency based in New York called the Industrial Removal Office. The Industrial Removal Office's mission was to resettle Jewish immigrants all over the country, preventing them from congregating on the East Coast. Now, the term Sephardic just means Spanish, and the Sephardic Jews were also referred to at that time as Oriental Jews or as Turkish Jews. Now, the reason we think the IRO had a role in resettling Sephardic immigrants in Indianapolis is because of these telegrams from the Kahn Tailoring Company, which we found in the archives at the Indiana Historical Society. These telegrams were sent from Kahn Tailoring, which was once a major enterprise here in the city. They manufactured custom-made men's clothing along with Army uniforms for World War I and World War II, and they recruited workers from among the immigrants that were arriving in the United States at that time. And they sent telegrams to the IRO, like this one from 1907, that says we are needing 4 or 5 coat makers to whom we will pay $15 and upward in accordance with ability. Now, many of the Monastirlis arriving in the U.S. did have experience in the needle trades, so we think that Mr. Kahn, who owned Kahn Tailoring, recruited particularly heavily among this group of immigrants. Now, the people from Salonika, who were known as the Salonicles, did not tend to be in the needle trades. They tended to be merchants and small business owners. One of our most beloved Sephardic citizens in Indianapolis here is Mr. Sidney Eskenazi. Mr. Eskenazi's father, David Eskenazi, and his uncle, Naphtali, came from Salonika, and they began a company, a wholesale produce company called Eskenazi Mordo Produce, as you can see on the trucks on the right. On the left, you can see a picture of Mr. Eskenazi's uncle, Naphtali, and his friend, Perisnamius, and it looks like they're dressed up as cowboys. And today, the Sephardic community is very vibrant here in Indianapolis. They have their own synagogue, Etz Chaim Sephardic Congregation. The original Etz Chaim was down on the south side at Church and Morris. Today, it's in a beautiful building up north of the JCC on Hoover Road. You should stop in one day and see it. It's a lovely building. People are extremely friendly. And most of all, you should try some of the Sephardic specialties, which are truly delicious and a wonderful culinary contribution to our rich immigrant communities here in Indianapolis.